Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Audit and Accounts Committee meeting. Fire evacuation procedures for this evening. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. So any mobile phones, please switch to silent or off. Thank you. Right, so item number 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. We have apologies from Councillor Basham, and Councillor Durrant is replacing him tonight. Welcome. That's it. Do we have any, under item 2, declarations of interest? Nope. We have no urgent matters to consider on item 3. So on to item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of June. Do I take it that we consider those minutes to be a fair reflection of that which went on? Yep. Yes. Okay, agreed. Item 5. This is the response to the Ernst and Young assurance letter. This is part of the annual audit process procedures. So we received this letter from the auditors, to which we have then replied. So that this committee does this committee agree with the draft letter as it now sits? Councillor Cubitt.
Yeah, I don't know whether we saw a draft before. Have you had assurances from senior management, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chairman, that all of the statements in this letter are accurate? It's my first question.
Yeah, I mean, as it goes from year to year, obviously the officers have been involved in the writing of this, so I'm confident that their statements are correct.
Okay, I mean, one of the areas that I had some concerns about were in section 6, where it says, is the Audit and Accounts Committee aware of any organisational or management pressures to meet financial operating targets? And I didn't know whether, and I would be interested in what our officers have to say in relation to a couple of things. Firstly, performance panel has not met, despite many members asking to meet, since January 2020. Is the chairman aware of that, and is the officer, Sue Curden, aware of that?
So at the beginning of the last May, it's not the current May, the previous May, Scrutiny Committee tried to convene the performance panel. There was only one member that came forward from the committee, so the group leaders were asked if they wanted to put forward other panel members, and unfortunately the Scrutiny Committee took the decision not to call the performance panel because there weren't enough members. So obviously we are convening one now, and we're going out to group leaders for members because we didn't get enough members at the Scrutiny Committee, with the intention of it meeting again in September. But this is the performance information that would otherwise have gone to, I mean, the performance information still went to scrutiny, it just didn't go to performance panel instead of scrutiny. But obviously all of the monitoring information goes to Cabinet and Council as appropriate.
So my recollection varies with yours because I have been on the performance panel pretty much most of my career, obviously as a councillor. I contacted Sadie regularly from March 2020 onwards, asking her when a performance panel would be convened. I've never sat on scrutiny, but I've always been on performance panel. And she kept on telling me, I don't know why it's not happening for the benefit of the public, Sadie is a former member of staff. I spoke to other group leaders, and I certainly was not asked to attend a meeting. And also, in terms of recollections varying, I was told by an officer last week that the scrutiny committee had decided to get rid of performance panel altogether. So it sounds like there's various recollections, and all I would like, Mr. Chairman, to say is, as a councillor elected to represent the residents of Basingstoke, I think it's extremely important. We have a performance panel which meets, and I think it's very shocking that there hasn't been one that has met since January 2020, and I don't accept that the subterfuge of COVID or the pandemic is an acceptable reason, and therefore I'm not 100% happy with what we say in this paragraph because it's not actually accurate.
I was on the scrutiny committee last year. I'm not on it this year. I do now remember the debates at the beginning of that year. I'm happy as the chairman of this committee that performance was considered by the scrutiny committee. But your point about should there be a performance panel and what is the constitutional implication if there isn't, should be taken outside of this particular meeting.
So I'm a reserve on the scrutiny panel, and I sat on it last week or the week before, I can't remember, and there was a request for this performance panel to be set up. I believe there are some spare places for it, so if Councillor Cubitt wants to go on that, I'm sure it's just a matter of asking.
Thank you very much. I have indicated to the leader that I am extremely interested in attending it in view of the fact that I think I have an enormous amount of expertise that I can bring to evaluating the performance of this council. Nonetheless, I don't think that statement is accurate. Secondly, I wondered whether this document, given the concerns about our relationship and our evaluation of meeting KPIs with regards to partnerships, since I haven't been here for a year, does this document deal with some of the many partnerships that we have problems with and have not got successful outcomes at the moment? And I know that this was flagged up with our auditors a couple of years ago. I'm fully cognizant of the problems with Serco and whether they're meeting their contractual obligations. I'm privy and aware of other partnership where we have severe difficulties. And where should that be in this letter?
I don't interpret it that way in terms of this assurance letter. This assurance letter is looking at the organisation. It's not looking down into the depths of the individual items. This isn't an audit letter, it's an assurance letter. So I'm happy as regards this assurance letter that that's not an issue we have to go into.
With great respect, Mr. Chairman, I suppose what I would like to know before I say to you I'm happy for you to sign this is it a fair reflection of the current status of the council? So I would like us to ask the question of Sue, in view of the fact that our auditors highlighted as one of the very areas of concern was the partnerships and the evaluation of the partnerships and whether they're performing in the way that they're supposed to. Sue, are you happy that all of the partnerships that we currently have significant agreements with are performing to the degree that they're supposed to be performing?
So I'm not going to answer that question. What I am going to answer is the fact that this question is talking about the organisation's financial management. It's not talking about partnership arrangements, not about evaluating partnerships. That certainly is picked up as an operating activity under the external audit. They will look at any impact on the financial statements in terms of has any of our relationships with our partners impacted significantly or materially on the statement of accounts. In my opinion, as it currently stands, we when I'm not aware of any situation where I think that our accounts have been misstated due to our partnership, plus the fact the auditors pick it up under our value for money. So it's one of the things they look at. They look at partnerships under value for money. So this is an assurance letter in terms of what has the committee seen? Have you been made aware of any of these things? So it's a statement of fact in terms of have you seen any of this at the committee? And this particular one...
It says organisational or management pressure.
Yes, but it's not talking... It's not...
In relation to operating targets?
So in discussion with the...
Not exclusively about finance, with regards to the Local Government Act, we are obligated to also evaluate whether we are meeting the obligations over and above the finance. So it's not purely an accounts issue.
So obviously, in discussion with the auditors, in understanding what they're trying to ask through this question, they're talking about, have any of us as senior managers, for example, instructed an individual to do management override, for example? And you're being asked, have you been made aware of any of these situations? And what this is talking about in terms of the monitoring goes to Cabinet, you're absolutely right. In this scenario, it would not be appropriate to reference performance panel because the performance panel functionality was undertaken by the scrutiny committee, so we can take those two words out. But this is not talking necessarily about KPIs. It's about talking about, in order to get to those targets, haven't any officers been put under pressure in order to misrepresent the information, etc. And the statement here is, have you as a committee, are you aware of any such issues?
So I go back, I understand that it's are we aware, but we can be blissfully unaware because we haven't asked the right questions. So I ask you again, do you have organisational management issues with significant partners at this moment that we should be aware of?
And I will answer the question again in terms of this is in relation to the annual statement of accounts, and I do not believe there are any misstatements in our annual statement of accounts in relation to our partnerships.
I'm not implying that there are misstatements in connection with the accounts. I'm not asking about the accounts or misstatements. I'm not implying misstatements. I'm talking about...
Yeah, you're asking me a question.
Yeah. Councillor Durham.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions. This one doesn't from this section. They're from full fashion, so I will just read them out. So it's page 16, agenda item 5, audit letter item 12. And it says, could the committee please consider whether the various COVID grant schemes distributed by BBVC, either as agent or as principal, are typically funded by central government and typically funded by central government, meet the definition of significant unusual transactions in the 21-22 financial year and should be disclosed here. If not, could the officer, Mr. Swain, by name, confirm his view on whether they should or should not be disclosed here?
Sue.
I can confirm they don't require to be disclosed here.
Councillor James.
Yeah, we seem to be on a bit of a long debate on this letter, and it's just really asking us to note it and comment on it. I think going back to the point about the performance panel and whether it meets or doesn't meet, I'm sure it will be back up and running soon. But I think it's really an instruction for you, Chair, or request, perhaps is politer, and more likely to win. If something came up on the performance panel, I've sat on scrutiny, I've sat on every committee apart from DC, and licensing. And when the performance panel tends to be wedged right at the end of the agenda. So you have a performance panel meet, they have good discussion about various issues, and it kind of goes to scrutiny and then sort of glides away. And I think if there's anything that occurs on that performance panel that is finance related, it should be highlighted to you as the chairman to bring a paper before this committee to deep dive the issue, rather than it going to scrutiny or the performance scrutiny where it's forgotten in a busy agenda, or the performance panel where you've got a very small number of people. We are the Audit and Accounts Committee. We have the right, I think, to request to look at anything that we feel we want to look at. And it seems to me that performance panel report will be the one that highlights, the KPI measures will highlight any issues that we want to look at. If they've not already come through as a report already, obviously. We don't want to duplicate ourselves. But.
I think you touch on an issue that we've been through before, which is that the audit and accounts does things like the treasury management system, etc. But budgets and the type of thing that the performance panel look at is a matter of scrutiny, not audit and accounts. That's the way it works in our constitution. You know, I've always thought that would be a debate to be had of should you rejig that, but that's the way we currently operate.
So, Mr. Chairman, we had a training session just before actually the current officer, Sue Curtin, arrived, and we spent a lot of money as a council having, I think, a 5-hour training session with a top accountant. And it was very clear at that meeting, the training that we were given, that our remit is much wider than that which you've just described. It is our responsibility to ensure that you know, we are sufficiently comfortable with both the audit and the governance of this council. The clue is in the name, and the clue is in the governance statement. So it's not exclusively and solely the accounts that is our responsibility, in my opinion.
Do you want to comment?
So the remit of the Audit and Accounts Committee obviously is governance of the organisation, whether that be internal audit, whether that be the treasury management stuff that has actually been delegated from council, the annual audit plan that's been delegated from council, and obviously the annual statement of accounts. It is not responsible for looking at the corporate monitoring, it's not looking at performance, and it's not looking at budget setting, etc. That is the remit of scrutiny, cabinet and council. So if there was an item on performance panel could ask for additional information on that particular item, and they could then choose to seek to have full debate about it at scrutiny committee, but it wouldn't come to audit and accounts committee.
Thank you. Back to this letter. Do any other councillors have any comments on it? I mean, your comments.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chairman. I mean, what I'd like is the officers to confirm the answers to each of these questions, so that it's not just a case of us blanket saying we're unaware. We could be unaware of a lot of things, but has the question been asked of the officers, is there any actual or potential litigation we should be aware of? Have we asked that question of the officers? Because I'm not prepared to agree to this letter until an officer has publicly said to me, no, the committee does not need to be aware of because there are none. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, I'm not prepared to say I'm unaware of something and therefore it doesn't exist.
I can confirm that I separately have to send an assurance letter as well, which is very similarly worded to the document that you're being asked to sign as a committee. And I can confirm that I'm not aware of anything that you're not aware of.
Okay, notwithstanding the comments that we will note in the minutes, agree that this letter should be sent to Ernst & Young, signed by me. Yep, thank you. Okay, so on to agenda item number 6. The Regulation of Investigative Powers Act 2000, RIPA, the annual report and annual review of the RIPA policy. So, Anne, is that? Yeah.
Chairman, this is the annual report that you receive each year as we're required to review it in accordance with our policy. So this year, no RIPA authorisations have been issued. That's to the end of the year, June 2022. You'll probably recall that last year the Council had an inspection from the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, and we did a full review of the policy following that. There's no need for further changes to the policy unless members have any specific questions. The policy is in Appendix 1. There have been some small changes that are shown tracked in red. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Parker.
Yes, Chairman. I'm just going to ask whether does the magistrate give the authorization or the authorizing officer who can do renewal and cancellation? This is 3.3 I'm looking at, where we have got, because I do remember the thing is that we had a different setup when I was in the courts, and this one is different. So can I have some clarification regarding that for the at 3.3?
If we were ever to need an authorisation, yes, we have to go through the magistrates' court to get one, and it has to be signed off by the authorising officers at the council, either the chief exec or the director, prior to doing that. In fact, we haven't applied for a RIPA authorisation for a good number of years because we don't normally do covert surveillance.
Yes, I mean, the main change for us as a committee is reducing the reporting from quarterly to January and to July, simply because there was been nothing in the reports. Do we note and agree the changes in Appendix 1? Good. Thank you. Right, so item 7, the annual property plan, which is the report on the year 2021-2022, which is last year. And of course, if we remember from the council in February, the property plan for this year is somewhat different and amended to the one that we'll be looking at here.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, as you know, a new strategic asset management plan was approved by Council in February. And within that plan, obviously, there is an updated annual property plan, which obviously this committee receives updates and the annual report against that plan. That plan notes the committee's previous request for benchmarking information, and that will certainly be included in future monitoring. But what it also identifies is the fact that the old property investment strategy has ceased. It's now part of our business as usual and focuses on the new property investment strategy, which operates in a slightly different manner. And as the Chair's already noted, this is in relation to 21-22, which was still operating under the old property investment strategy, which in money terms was the £32.5 million that was spent on a handful of assets. Those are now part of our business as usual, and we have a new property investment strategy. So this is looking at the previous year, not the new updated strategic asset management plan. So I'm going to hand over to Martin, who's going to take you through the report.
Thank you, Sue. As I said, it's a look back at 2021 to 2022 and working under the old property investment strategy. There have been no further purchases. As you will sort of gather, we spent £32 million in the sort of previous years. Those properties are performing well in the body of the report. You can see some of the sort of rental increases at review on some of those properties we have bought. JLL have developed a new asset management plan which was signed off by Cabinet and Council in sort of February this year. And for the period 2021 to 2022, it's been really about asset management, maximising the sort of returns we can get through the properties, sort of managing the issues and the fallout from COVID, and working with a lot of the tenants. The industrial market has been sort of particularly strong. Our portfolio is sort of more or less 70% industrial and has sort of performed very, very well. Retail has been sort of challenging, as well as the food and sort of beverage sort of sector. A big area of success during last year has been the sort of rent gears on the various sort of properties we've undertaken, and there's an annex sort of in the pack which sort of points out some of those successes. I'll just pick out a few by sort of exception. The St Modwyn's deal, which is the old Motorola ITT site, in exceptionally sort of good return there. Managed to sort of get a tenant for the whole development and a cutting-edge sustainable industry. Normandy House is sort of more or less been will be sort of completed this year, but the agreement was completed in 2021-22 in order to sort of convert that space into residential units and get a non-income producing asset into sort of a positive income producing situation. And they produced quite substantial sort of capital gains on book value. So there's sort of many successes that are listed there. Additionally, a massive focus on sustainability and ensuring that the portfolio is resilient sort of going forward. And we continue to undertake a number of work streams on sort of on those areas, sort of ensuring that the buildings are compliant going forward, as there's sort of many regulations we've got to sort of meet. In addition, on the operational portfolio, we've sort of secured sort of lettings as well on sort of parklands, bringing in some income as well. So you know, that's sort of a quick sort of canter through the sort of progress to date. If there's any questions.
Councillor James.
Thank you. Probably have quite a few. That's weird. Okay. Yeah, the first one is Annex 1, sample of significant transactions. I don't like the word significant because I appreciate from a property management point of view, significant is probably set as a value. As a councillor level kind of point of view, significant. Swan Street would not be significant financially, but I've sat in a pub in Kingsclear and heard a lot about Swan Street and the property there. So I think it would be good to get a fuller list. I appreciate then we drift on to pink papers, fully accept that. Because another thing, I bring up Eli Lilly, Basing View. Now, I've followed that from its original shops going, and in fact, nearly a Conservative council lost its shop in that. So the summary you've got here, £1 million a year rent, absolutely spot on, but actually hides the original complexity of the deal, which involves an old property, a significant investment from the LEP into the development of the building in the first place. So until you can see a full picture, it's very hard for me as a councillor to say, and that one I actually think was a really good deal. I think it's, grade A office space, 15-year lease, we've got to, even when they go, we'll have our money back and a really good office block. But I'd like to see the fuller picture on some of these. I don't know how we get to that point, and I appreciate you don't want to be saying, oh, I'd like to sell that, but I can't really do it until I get to audit and accounts, because we can't have that. So, but I'd like to have a bigger, better view, rather than sort of a snapshot, this helpful snapshot, but I don't know how we get there. But is it possible to have a better view, albeit on pink papers, even if it's not actually as an agenda item on a committee meeting, that can be provided? These are the deals that we are doing or expecting to do at some point in the, on a regular basis, get an update. So it doesn't have to be a committee topic, but I need to look at it, particularly as my ward includes obviously viables and it includes Basing View. I'm quite interested in some of the commercial property deals we do as well as the community ones.
Yeah, there won't be a problem with that. We can provide you with that information.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor James. That's a very good point. Thank you. Councillor Durrant.
Chair, another question from Councillor Basham on page 52, agenda item 7, item 2.9. It's a fairly blunt question. What does this mean? Specifically, could we have some examples of the type of obligations relieved? What is cost avoidance in this context? And how does this impact on the community's strategy? Examples, please.
Sorry.
Yes, sorry if I've gone into sort of jargon there. What we're trying to do with the community strategy, it covers community centres, WC accommodation, for example, where we want to transfer to the parishes in some cases where agreement can be reached. It can be where community centres want to take a sort of a more hands-on approach to their community centres themselves, enter into agreement with ourselves and appropriate leases covering those points. So it is work, sort of work in progress, and it is trying to hand responsibility, or for certain assets over to either community groups or parish councils.
So those would be the costs that are being avoided by handing them over?
Yes.
Right. Okay, that's fine. If I may, just a question on section 3, sustainability. Do we have an assessment of all the properties we own that show and demonstrate the potential for its contribution to zero carbon targets?
Yes, this is work that is sort of presently underway. We have sort of most of the information, I won't say all of it, and we've appointed a company recently called Tech to carry out an energy audit of all those buildings, focusing particularly on the council occupied and run buildings, so we can closely track energy costs.
Thank you. Just one last one, if I may. On the last page of Annex 1, sample of significant transactions 2021-22, under Mountbatten House, under the third column, pounds, it says a £5 million receipt received from the council.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, apologies. It's slightly we will, as a council, receive a £5 million
Right.
receipt for
Right.
Mountbatten House, which is about £2.5 million
Yeah.
in excess of the sort of valuation, and they've carried out a £30 million refurbishment of the building.
Right. Okay, no, I thought that's probably what it was, but I just wanted to make sure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a big one.
I just clarifying that in the word receipt, in that context, is it a sale? The money we receive from the sale? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Kotecha.
Very much, Chair. I just wanted to ask, do you feel that we're getting value for money with the investments we've made? Are we getting good returns for that? And another thing I would like to ask, how is the new system going to be different to the old one? How does it work?
So in terms of the overall receipt, yes, we continue to exceed the original 5% requirement in terms of the internal rate of return, the initial rate of return. In terms of how the previous property investment strategy works and how the new one works, the old one was a specified sum of money which increased our overall property holdings by originally 30 million, but with an extension of up to 35. And the scheme was closed once we'd made the final purchase, taking it to 32.5 million. And that £2.5 million over the 30 million effectively has to be repaid through another disposal back into the pot, if you like. That was a closed sum of money which was looking at an alternative investment strategy which was looking to achieve a higher return than we could get otherwise under Treasury management. And once the funding was spent, it was spent. And it wasn't about active asset management or strategic asset management of our current portfolio. It was about investing money, further money in property to effectively achieve a higher rate of return than we were getting on that money whilst it was going through treasury management activity. So it's part of our alternative investment strategy. The new property investment strategy has a different focus. In my opinion, as 151 officer, I think we've reached a limit or a ceiling of the amount of money we should be investing in property at the current time. And therefore, working with JLL, the proposal is that we concentrate on our underperforming assets. We look at assets that we're not holding for any particular purpose. They may well just be things that, you know, we've got an opportunity to sell, strategic sites, etc. But the plan being is that actually we dispose of underperforming assets to then actually invest in assets of the same value, but actually get us a greater return for the council. And that will be a rolling programme. So we have this continuous cycle that's built into the capital programme of a £30 million scheme with a £10 million, for want of a better word, starter amount if we do any investments in advance of any disposals. So it's a completely different scheme in that it's about actually rebalancing the portfolio, it's about removing underperforming assets, it's about looking at rebalancing everything.
Councillor Tustine.
About, oh, somebody's, sorry, underperforming assets, would that wouldn't touch things like community assets, would it? Because these ones, again, this is about the well-being of people rather than just the financial transactions here.
So the property investment strategy only covers properties that we hold for property investment purposes, so it doesn't include operational or community assets.
Thank you.
Councillor Kotecha.
Okay, you said underperforming, so, okay, we saw the underperforming asset, and you just mentioned we've reached our limit on actual housing or property investments. When we sell the actual underperforming assets, can we buy other property? Because you said we've got to the maximum, or are we going to invest in other sort of investments?
So let's say, for argument's sake, we have a £300 million property portfolio. We sell a £10 million asset, we can buy another £10 million asset. So we're looking to not necessarily exceed our kind of ceiling, if you like, but obviously if we dispose of an asset, we can then use that money and reinvest it to try and get a better return, if you like.
Sorry, I'm not worried. So when you reinvest, would that be in property or another investment? Okay, brilliant, thank you.
Councillor James, did you?
I've answered it myself.
All right. Councillor Cubitt.
Mr. Chairman, what's the total value of the property portfolio at the moment, and what's the annual rental income?
The value of the investment portfolio is 340 million, and the previous year it was 295, and that's partly a result of the sort of performance of industrial property, which is performing very well nationwide, and through sort of a number of the lease regears that have been undertaken.
So does that also mean that this is a direct result of the revaluations following on from our commissioning of JL, whatever it's called, calculations on the values of our underlying assets?
No, it's a case of one, certain sectors of the market performing very well, and sort of secondly, a number of the lease regears, which were presently not income producing, sort of generating significant value to the portfolio when the leases were regeared.
So, gosh, I mean, that's amazing outcome. I mean, I'm looking at previous years and the information we're given versus the information that you've chosen to give us today. And I think just for the benefit of the committee, and I've always felt passionately about it, it's good to have comparisons that enable us to know what's happened last year versus this year. So I don't know what the chairman thinks, but I think going forward it would be extremely useful to have the value repeated and the annual rental income repeated each year, and the sums of the acquisitions and the regearing, etc.
Okay, Sue can add to that.
Absolutely. I'm more than happy for us to put that into aid with your information and understanding.
Thank you very much. Now, going on, I am on record as saying when we took the 30 million out of the Treasury portfolio and allowed the council, through a council motion, to put it into property to increase the yield because interest rates were historically at an all-time low, it was always the understanding of the committee and the council that that money that had been taken out of the Treasury investment bond portfolio and put into the property investment portfolio could be evaluated to ensure that its value was doing well and that it didn't disappear into the huge commercial real estate portfolio that we have already, which is legacy. So I'm dismayed, because I repeated this at various meetings for the last 5 years, I'm very dismayed that the administration have decided to make that 30 million, which became 32 temporarily because of a rinky-dink to do with some deal that required extra money in the short term, but a commitment from the council to liquidate that, to go back to the 30 million because that was the explicit instruction of the council. I'm dismayed that that has now disappeared into this fungible legacy commercial real estate portfolio, because what that means is that we'll not be able to evaluate whether those assets that were invested in acquired estate actually ended up being a good investment in the long term, because we all know that when you buy secondary commercial real estate, you can get great return, but your initial investment goes down significantly and can end up being substantially less, i.e. your front-ending revenue, but your overall investment ends up being considerably less than the initial investment. And now with you advising us that apparently we all agreed, a little bit like the smarter ways of working when we didn't really understand that we were all agreeing to the staff working for 3 days a week forevermore at home, were the council aware that they'd agreed to that 30 million investment disappearing into a bunny rabbit hole, and we now won't be able to evaluate whether it's still worth 30 million or it's worth 32 million or it's worth 36 million in 5 years' time?
It was obviously quite transparent and detailed in the new property investment strategy, so it was referred to and it was picked up as the point that from an operational point of view, I appreciate, it is monitored in the same way as all of our other properties. So we don't just monitor it as one lump, we monitor every individual property. So if, as part of the annual report, you would like us to include an update in terms of how those particular properties performed, I'm more than happy to do that. Because we can still look at it on an individual basis, but as from a monitoring point of view, the deal was done, the money is there, it's been invested, and we're getting we monitor the portfolio as a whole. But we can certainly include as part of the annual report on the annual property plan an update on how those particular buildings are progressing.
I'd be really grateful. I know that historically fellow colleagues specifically said that they wished for that sheet of paper which detailed the 5 assets that were invested from conversion from Treasury into commercial real estate. And as you will, and you've made reference to it, how we have to rebalance our investments, you will also recall that I've always been extremely concerned about the fact that so much of our investment is in commercial real estate, when I come from a background where you should be diversifying your portfolio. So I'm delighted to hear that you're looking to diversify. But nonetheless, if I could carry on asking some questions, I'd be very grateful. In 2.8, you make a reference to the revenue generated from the leasing to the NHS. What was your predicted revenue from Parklands when the SW, when the Smart Ways of Working project was put forward? And does that include money that we had to spend to get it to a certain quality? Is it a net figure or is it a gross figure? And how much do we have to spend before we actually rented it to the NHS?
So if I take that one, so the assumption was that we would raise circa £180,000 by renting out the building. As you can see, we're actually getting 270. So we've managed to exceed what we expected, and the occupier took the building as is. So we did not have to spend money, and they also took our redundant furniture that we would have otherwise had to dispose of. So actually, so that is it is a gross figure, but actually there was no cost to offset against it.
Excellent, thank you very much. Great news, well done. In kind of conclusion, I would very much appreciate that sheet of paper which evaluates those investments because they were specifically supposed to be ring-fenced. Secondly, I would like considerably more information on the performance of this portfolio at this meeting annually. And I'd like it to go back to what it used to be like under your predecessor, where we're told what the value is each year, what the annual rental income is each year, and the numbers that make up the success stories that you've clearly had, and I congratulate you on, but I'd like in future for us as a committee to see more of the information that feeds that information. Thank you.
Okay, good. Councillor James.
Only to, my recollection of the history is actually very similar to Onley Cubits until she started talking. And then it went a bit, the 30 million that went into the original property investment strategy, I think that was to create a vehicle because we realised that if you want to move quickly, one thing councillors aren't very good at is moving quickly when it comes to decision making. And sometimes in the property market, if you want to shift something or gain something or take an opportunity, you kind of need an answer fairly quickly. And there was a vehicle to do that. Clearly, once you'd spent that money and acquired good properties, why would you have two different management regimes managing long-term investment? It was supposed to be that short-term. If you gain something, you've got it. You'd then swap it into the council's mainstream stuff. If we found a way round the making quick investment decisions without having to go through the sort of process that councillors have, then we don't really need it at all. I've got no problem with investing money in property. I think it helps us shape the economy of the borough. Clearly, we're very wise. We know not to expose it. And I saw some of the reports that came out when, you know, various other Chinham Shopping Centre came up, and we ran a mile because we've got some exposure to retail already. So I think sensible decisions are made. I think should we continue it. I don't really understand why diversification. I mean, we own office blocks, we own retail, we own warehousing, we own lots of property. It is diversified. Whereas, of course, if you've got money, it's not really diversified. A banking crash kills money, whatever you do. So it doesn't mean we can't change strategies. For many years, money was useful. Financial investments, pathetic returns, to be honest, wasn't even keeping pace with inflation. It's actually losing us money by having cash investments. We've migrated to property. It may come a time to migrate back, but I don't think we should knock property investments, because I think actually for the borough, money is fairly useless to us because we can't spend our assets. Revenue is really critical to us because we can spend that, and property is generating a huge amount of revenue, more than our financial investments ever could.
Councillor Cubitt.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry.
So, what I would love now to hear is an update from Martin, if possible, on Basingview, please, and where we're at there, because obviously I drive past it every day, and it just for, I mean, you know, about, I think it's 8 years ago, lovely glossy picture before you even turned up, saying Basingview, the best connected, most affordable business destination in the south, and how we were going to do all these amazing things. And obviously there's still a lot of vacant property there 10 years later. Yeah, there is. But I'd love an update if possible, please.
I think that needs to go to a later committee, because this is a report on last year up until March 20 of this year. So the points you're making would really be in this year's strategy.
No, I mean, with great respect, what I mean is I'd like to hear what's happened to Basingview during this last year.
We'll be happy to circulate a note to all members in terms of what's been updated on Basingview.
Can I not have a...
Martin's not in charge of Basingview, Kate Dean is.
Oh,
So he's not the appropriate officer.
Okay, so
But I'm happy to circulate afterwards an update on Basingview, if that's what members would like.
So just for my, for the benefits of the public as well, Martin, does Basingview sit underneath your responsibility, or is it separate to your responsibility?
It's sort of split with sort of myself and Kate. There are a lot of good news stories coming up on sort of Basingview. A number of them are actually in Annex 1 as well. And there's sort of further news to sort of developing, which is in the early stage at the moment.
So Martin, are you involved at all with the leisure park, or is that also not under your bailiwick?
The leisure park is dealt with by Kate exclusively. We do the management of the existing tenants within the sort of leisure park, and sort of works to the aquadrome, as is, but not the new development plans.
And so does that mean also that the value of the assets that we have with regards to Manydown, etc., that also doesn't fall under you? So you don't have the leisure park, you don't have Basingview, and you don't have Manydown. Are any of those figures in that 300 and, what was the figure you just gave us? What was that figure you gave us?
So just picking up that point, obviously, a number of the items you're raising are regeneration, and they're dealt with by Kate Dean as the regeneration manager. The assets on Basingview that are obviously already let, etc., are included in the valuations. But obviously, the update in terms of what's happening on Basingview, the strategy of Basingview, etc., comes under Kate Dean.
So just, I'm not being very intelligent. So of the 345 million that you referred to, a large percentage of that is actually to do with Basingview Leisure Park and Manydown then? I would like circulated afterwards, if possible, Mr. Chairman, the actual list of the sites that add up to 345, because obviously here what we have for investment property, existing investment property 272, property investment strategy 30, investor grow investment, Manydown service-based loans, and that all came to an estimate in 2020 of 333 million. And then the estimate of those same assets by 2021 was 336 million. And then by 2022, 345 million, which is great because it means that basically this paper in 2019 has got its estimates accurate with your 345 million. But it's just useful to have the breakdowns, I think.
So obviously, as part of the annual statement of accounts, we do provide that breakdown by the groupings, so we'll be happy to provide that to you.
Councillor Putty, sorry I missed you previously.
Thank you, Chairman. No worries. I have got just two quick questions. This is to do with Square or Basingview and the Quantum House. With regards to the lease regear, and it says completion is due July 22. Are both of these been completed now? We are in July.
Yeah, we've got apologies. Yeah, we've got engrossments of those documents circulating, which are the documents to be signed, but they haven't been signed yet. So we're sort of chasing the solicitors.
A time scale, or is it going to be within July, or is it going to?
Sorry, I think it's a question of probably a week or so. And the same with Quantum House as well.
There was just a little one. The thing is that we all know that the restaurant sector was challenging with regards to 2.5 at Little Frankie, which has entered into a creditors' voluntary agreement and vacating, and also that there are some interest soon. So what is the situation for the time being?
Sorry, We're marketing the property. We're getting sort of interest from a variety of sort of retailers, but we haven't got heads of terms agreed with anybody yet. But we are marketing quite aggressively, as it's one of the few vacant units we've got in the portfolio.
This is when the Little Frankies entered creditors' voluntary agreement. Is there any money owing or?
That's commercially sensitive at the moment, and we've got to do sort of look at that in further detail.
Okay, well, we've given that one quite an airing. We're asked to note this report, and obviously Ellie will note a lot of the comments. Councillor Katecha, do you want to make another point?
3 questions, sorry. You were talking about diversity of our investments. May I ask, what sort of investments are we looking at? Are there medium risk investments where we get better returns? And are we looking at more industrial estate property than retail, as retail is not giving us good returns in the future?
Yeah, when we assess sort of investments, they've got to conform to a matrix of sort of criteria, so the return on investments, the unexpired term of the lease, if there's a break clause, we've got to sort of assess things like that, the quality and the sustainability in particular. There's beginning to be a little two-tier market on sustainability, so we've got to push that really hard, not only on existing portfolio, but on properties we buy in. We are looking to diversify sort of uses, from, for example, the life science sector. We're heavily weighted in industrial at the moment, but we might get rid of some of the underperforming industrial units and buy some newer ones. So those are the sorts of things we're looking at, and the general trends in the market as well.
Okay, we're asked to note the report. I think some of the points have been very useful. I think we've the performance for last year has been extremely encouraging, so well done on that. I think for next year, taking some of the points here, more detail in next year's report would probably be of great interest to the committee. Thank you. Okay, so that leads us on to the work programme. So September is going to be a bigger meeting. We've got the Ernst & Young.
No, that's not coming.
Is it not coming? Oh, it's not going to be such a big meeting. The Ernst & Young initial audit report. Are we looking at November for that?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, with the general situation with the audit of the borough, district councils, etc., that's everywhere is being pushed back to November. Statement of accounts will be very interesting, and that will have a lot of the information that has been mentioned this evening. Summary of investment income. Are there any other items not on here? Internal audit progress report, Q1 Treasury Management report. Yeah, so that's for the 26th of September. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. Good to see you all again. Welcome back, Councillor Cubitt, after your year's sojourn as Mayor.